Good morning, everyone. It's 8:15, so let's just get started with our Whatcom Public Utility District regular commission meeting of August 8th. I also want to make a quick announcement that Jamie is not able to participate because she's under the weather. So we're all wishing her a speedy recovery. And let's get started. The first item on our agenda is the pledge of allegiance.
For the record, that's an excused absence. And I see both commissioners nodding their heads.
Yes.
That.
Yes. So first item is our pledge of allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first let's go over our agenda. Are there any changes or amendments to our agenda?
None for me. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
A second. So there's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. We've got two meeting minutes to approve for the July 11th and July 25th, as well as the claims for August 8th.
Okay, I have a few questions about the claims. So I'll just jump into those.
Yes.
So there was an $8,000 charge for Hack Company for our annual service agreement. What's that for?
Good morning, Commissioner. The PAC company, you said?
Yeah, HACK.
Oh, Hawk. Oh, yeah. Okay. I do not know that one off the top of my head. I'll have
Morning,
to.
Commissioners.
You know that one, Kurt?
Yes, Hatch Company.
Oh,
They come here
Hatch.
to the plants and they do service and maintenance on our turbidimeters. And turbidity is what is the cleanliness of the river. And so that's how we can tell that we're sending out to our customers the correct level of water.
Do they measure the turbidity of the water after we treat it?
No, they calibrate the meters that allow us to measure the turbidity.
Okay. So that's, they charge us $8,000 a year for their services, or just for what?
Yes, that's for their services. They have to come here to the facility and
Okay,
they calibrate them. So
Okay.
then we have the correct process.
okay. All right. Thanks, Kurt.
You're welcome.
My other question was about the $9,000 that we spent on the boat ramp and $638 at LFS for boat supply. I know we already bought the boat and that was budgeted at $55,000. And then signage, accessories, and safety equipment was an additional $5,000. I didn't know we were going to be spending $10,000 on a boat ramp. Well, 9,000. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Kurt, do you know what the
Well,
individual?
So the idea of, I don't know, maybe we can get into the specifics. I'm not really 100% sure, but part of the idea behind the boat is that we can access the intake building on high rivers and other uses as well, but in high rivers, in case we have an issue that we need to get out to the facility. And so we actually did a little boat ramp here, which would be it seems kind of weird. It's almost like if you think about Lake Mead or whatever, where you have all these floating docks that are sitting on the water. We get the river so high that we have the river is almost right behind the admin building. And so this is a place where we can get the boat in the water and then get out to the intake facility.
Okay.
So I guess it probably wasn't an anticipated activity when we budgeted for it.
Mhm.
And then kind of in retrospect, it was like, well, when you need it, the water's already above any place we could normally launch. So that's what this is for.
Mhm. Okay, okay. All right, I have to say, the whole boat expense has been a question mark in my mind, just because it seems like we've been able to operate without one, and then it's, you know, fairly significant expense for our ratepayers. And, you know, I also just hope that it doesn't actually create safety problems for us by going out into conditions that we wouldn't normally go into. So just have to be honest that it's been a little bit of a head scratcher for me.
So
boat
Commissioner,
expense.
the thing that brought it really to our attention was we had to have people out at the intake structure, operating compressors and other things
Mhm.
during the 2021 floods.
Mhm.
And the concern was the water comes up a foot from what it actually did, and those people would be stuck out there
Mhm.
and we'd have to rescue them.
Mhm.
So it would be, you know, depend on the sheriff's department to get them out, or we have our own ability to run people back and forth, get supplies out there. And that was really what triggered the whole thing, was the 2021 floods.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I guess my question is it absolutely mission critical that we have people out there during those floods? Or could we wait until the waters recede? I think getting people out there on a boat during flood conditions presents a whole host of additional safety issues that might also involve the sheriff having to come get us. So, not to mention the impact on our ratepayers. So it's, you know, water under the bridge, no pun intended, but I'd like us to think a little bit more carefully about expenses like this in the future. It just, especially, you know, we need to be careful about our rates. We've had a lot of rate increases, and it hasn't felt like this is an absolute necessity. And the additional $10,000 for the boat ramp just, yeah, it just caught my eye.
Commissioner,
So-
if I could weigh in,
Well-
Commissioner,
Yeah.
I consider that boat mission critical. We have had a number of flood events over the years where we haven't been able to get out to the intake facility at Plant 2. And we relied on remote control of that plant. Without the boat, the capability to get out there, if something happens to our comm link, that intake goes down. We lose half the capability of our system. And in events like that, we can't afford to do that. So it may seem like an expense unneeded, but the reality is it's very much needed as a backup system in case we have a failure of communications with the intake, or something happens to the intake equipment due to the flood. Thank you.
Okay, well, I also just really hope that we're thinking through what our safety procedures are when we're sending people out on a boat in a flood condition, when first responders are tapped. As somebody that's, you know, spent a lot of time on boats in my life, things can happen really quickly. And, you know, my number one priority as a commissioner is that we all are safe. And this introduces a whole host of new safety issues that are a red flag for me. So, you know, that's going to be a continued expense too, training people and making sure that they actually know how to operate this boat. So, Brian, I'm glad you think it is mission critical. That makes me feel better. But you know, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't share my concerns. We can move on though.
Appreciate that, Commissioner. We have had training sessions since we purchased the boat. We've had several, in fact, both on the river and in Lake Whatcom. We started there because that was an easy place to start, but we do have training sessions. We do have safety gear, and we won't let anybody out on that boat unless they are sufficiently trained.
Okay. I have a few more questions. The $7,000 for the in-stream flow support for HDR, which contract was that a part of?
That's part of our legal contract where we're asking HDR to look at in-stream flow.
Okay. And then I just have to ask the $197 for red pencils and paper?
That's office supplies for water plants.
Okay, why red pencils?
They use that in their. They write in a diary with water conditions and temperatures, and that's just what they use.
They like red pencils. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure again that I'm asking questions. That's all for me on the claims. What about anything, Neil?
No, I was thinking about the vote thing. I just, after the discussion, I wanted to reflect on that. You know, one of the principles of safety that I've been exposed to my whole career, when I've been working on industrial facilities, is the importance of always having a backup. Always never being in a situation in a mission critical operation, which the PUD is, where you've only got one thing holding everything together. And I think that's the logic behind the vote, because the staff identified a case where if one thing breaks, our ability to provide the mission critical function breaks. So but what's interesting about the vote, it's I don't know if this is a fair analogy, is to think about having a parachute as an option, as a fallback on a plane. And of course, the parachute also has substantial risk associated with it. Do you know how to use a parachute? They usually don't say to passengers, you know, parachute training. You can't do that in the 2 minutes before you take off. So I just was thinking about that. I'm not critical of anything. I was just thinking about, yeah, the boat itself is in flood conditions is quite a safety issue as well.
I'm just gonna, on the adjudication related expenses that fall under the approvals that we give for the experts and consultants, and we've reviewed those with you in the past, but before an invoice comes to you on the claims, it goes through 3 or 4 separate eyes to confirm the reasonableness we thought of the expenses and the work produced. It goes through Steve and Chris, it goes through my office, then it also goes through Tupper Wells. So all of us look at that. And before it goes on to your claims approval, we all have to sign off on it. We've had adjustments in the past with some of these that we've said, hey, change your structure. You don't need to do this every, week. You can do it once a month, and kind of a monitoring issue just to try to control costs. But just so you know, that's the process that it goes through before it comes to you.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and thank you for putting an eye on the claims.
Oh,
I-
I actually have one last thing with the claims I'm just curious that there's the bolding is really the numbers. I don't understand the rhyme and the reason behind the bolding. Like certain numbers are bolded and others aren't. We don't need to waste a lot of, when I'm reading these though, it's just a little hard to understand if you're drawing my attention to something or why certain numbers are bolded or not. I don't know.
Commissioner, yeah, that's a request by the county. So in order for the county to process this, we go through all our data entry, you approve them, and then we send it paper copy over to the county. And so what they've requested is either a total, or if it's just a one single line item, that be bolded. But if it's a like a list of multiple invoices for the same vendor, that those will not.
Oh, I see.
So we
Okay.
can ignore the bolding, basically,
Yes.
for our purposes of review.
Yeah.
Okay, actually that is, okay. All right, well, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, I'll second it. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's move on to our public comment. Hopefully in the room, we've got some public comment.
Yeah, we both want to come. I mean, he may not, but he will after I.
Please, step
You
up
have to step up the microphone. You can do it individually, or you can do it as a duet, however you like it.
Robin Dexter. Okay. I had no intention of commenting until Commissioner Grant started talking about the vote. And it's illustrative of a comment that you're all tired of me making, but I'm gonna make it again. The vote was resorted to to prepare for the kinds of emergencies that you're going to have to deal with. I have long urged you to increase your reserves. And I'm gonna do it again, because the uncertainty around climate issues is something that deserves your consideration, because you will be winding up as the entity of last resort in climate emergencies. The rest of the governments will be completely overwhelmed. You're not expected to be prepared. So I think as pertains to our future, and you know, we're all reading all the stuff. I would like to see much larger reserves at the PUD, and I understand Rick will explain the other side of that, but I think that you guys so far, adjudication notwithstanding, are so far under the radar that it would be a really good idea to start accumulating reserves to deal with situations that we can't even imagine. I've always felt that about the PUD, and I maybe have never said this for Commissioner Grant, so there you have it.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It's a lot of insists.
Yeah.
When it comes to reserves, as far as I'm concerned, the PUD's current policy on reserves and the way that it's implemented is quite sufficient for what the PUD has by way of business and the risks that we face.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Robin. Is there any comment from our Zoom participants? Please raise your hand if there is. Okay, that closes our public comment period. Let's move on to our general manager's report.
So the last time we met in person, I believe, Commissioner Grant, you mentioned you'd like to hear me talk more about kind of strategically where we're going and how that relates back to our strategic plan. So that's what I'm prepared to do today. So I won't be talking about getting the washout and all the normal stuff we do. I want to talk first about municipalization and kind of where we are looking at that. And just as a reminder, when we got the study from ESS, what it showed was twofold. One, that it made no sense financially whatsoever to municipalize unless you could get access to some amount of tier 1 Bonneville power. And then it, you know, there was a long discussion about how to do that, and needless to say, that's difficult. The flip side of that, though, is the reason that you want access to tier 1 power is because it's going to be less than the market forwards are when you look at 2030, 2031 type windows. And right now, those are in the low 80s. And so that's kind of the bogey. So when you think about municipalization, just purely financial issue, not all of the other great local benefits that it brings, you know, local control and money recirculating in the economy, just a flat out rates issue. That was the hurdle that we were looking at in the study. But you can flip that on its head and say, okay, that's fine. But what about, are there sources that we can get that are cheaper than the market forwards when you look at future prices? So that was kind of the paradigm shift, if you will, where I started looking at this. And that leads me to the whole energy supply discussion. And I want to have a brief discussion on that. And I'm mindful of having 10 minutes on the report. So I don't want to
Take
go
as
too
long as you want. Yes, yeah.
So on the energy supply side, first thing we always need to do is what do we need for today? And it's about 25 average megawatts. And that's close to what our tier 1 allocation is. Brian could talk at great length about, you know, when we trigger into tier 2 and how the high water mark is going to adjust for the 2023 year and all of the things that are associated with that. But the reality is we need about 25 average megawatts to power our 2 water plants and our our industrial customer, Phillips 66. So that's always our target, and that's kind of the target for the future. Right now, when you look at the Mid-Columbia out around 2030, you're somewhere around $80 a megawatt hour. And that's a real generic price that's quoted. We get that every week. And it reflects a 24-hour-a-day block of power that you could buy for that year forward. It doesn't mean that that power is available. It just means that's what it's transacting at today. If we went out and tried to buy 200 megawatts of 2030 power, that's when you'd find out what the price is. So it's, there's a discovery process that goes in there, but these are some of the reported things that we look at. Working with Energy Northwest, there are three things that we're looking at right now with regards to power supply. The first is Ruby Flats, which is a 150 megawatt solar plant that's being built out in Eastern Washington. I've been in on their weekly status calls for about a year now, and we still don't have the developer's commitment for the cost. And part of that is they don't have the Bonneville commitment for when they're going to do their system studies, which is what shows what reinforcement, if any, is needed on the system in order to connect. The last I heard was they were looking at $65 at the bus bar for energy unfirmed. So we'd still need to firm it and transport it, and that'd be $25 to $35 a megawatt hour. So you're looking at Ruby Flats somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 a megawatt hour. And that's at this point purely speculative. We don't know what the price is going to be. We don't know what the timing is going to be. I suspect that may be a little high on the pricing, and the timing would be somewhere in the 2027, 2028, because the actual connection for it is a really short 115 line extension down a right of way that they already have. It's about a 4-mile extension. Yes, sir.
When you calculate the cost of delivering power, delivering the power from the bus bar, how much is that a portion of the cost of the wholesale power to begin with at the bus bar? I mean, how much of it is a multiplier of the cost of the bus bar, or how much of it is a not related to the quantity of power?
Yeah. So
how much is variable? How much is fixed?
So the $65 that I'm quoting is what the developer has said per megawatt hour at the bus bar. So that is literally the wholesale price of the
So
power.
I mean, it's the second chunk that I'm asking.
The second chunk has two main parts. The first part is firming. So to the extent that the solar generation does not match your load profile, which in our case it does not. Our load profile is 24 hours a day flat. So we would need to shape that so that it ends up being a flat amount. So there's a number of ways to do that, but they all cost money. And so what we do is we add an estimate onto that per megawatt hour for shaping and firming. And then we add about $20 a megawatt hour for transport. And that's what, between Puget and Bonneville, that's what we pay to move power across the state right now.
Yeah, so $20 is what I would call fixed, and the other chunk that you're talking about is related to the underlying supply quantity. And it's probably a multiplier on the underlying supply quantity.
I wouldn't describe it as a multiplier, it's additive.
Additive
So-
based on the type of supply and the quantity of supply.
That's right.
Okay.
The second that we're looking at again with Energy Northwest is they're looking at bringing out small modular reactors and generation 4 reactors, pebble bed technology and gas cooled. And they're looking at having those online sometime between 2030 and 2031. Currently, they've asked for commitment letters from various people. And I think, do you remember, it's 13 of
Quite
the
a few.
PUDs have signed.
Okanagan, just.
That's half, dude.
Yeah, I think it was like a
That's how-
total of 13. And then there's a bunch of co-ops that have also, I think, expressed interest, as well as, I believe, well, I won't quote. There was a number of people that have expressed interest in it beyond just the PUDs. And so the question that we've got is, well, first of all, what's the price? And the head of Energy Northwest has said that he thinks it's somewhere between $60 and $90 at the bus bar, more towards 90. That was the last quote that I got when he was at the Waputa meeting. And the issue there is, in terms of firming, you don't have to firm it. It's 24/7. It's about a 93, 94% availability. but you got to transport it. So if you take 90 and then 20 to transport it, you're at 110. Again, you know, compare that to the mid 30s and the mid 80s at mid C in 2030. But we're going to be meeting with Energy Northwest virtually. We're going to have a call with them on Thursday and talk a lot more about what the process would be to get engaged with them and what, you know, potentially when we could find out more firm prices and just what you need to do. The third sourcing issue that we're pursuing with Energy Northwest is geothermal. Interestingly enough, Mount Baker is a dormant volcano and there's hot rock underneath it. And
I thought it erupted the other day.
No, I know. It was just the fire looked, the sourdough fire made it look like it was erupting.
yeah, we see that plume, but it's way off of the mountain when you're up in Linden. It's anyway, but I get your point. So there's two different paths that we're looking at with Energy Northwest. The first is we've been assured by all kinds of various people that there are federal grant monies available for this type of thing. So we've got Energy Northwest. They have a service where they search for grants and then they help with the characterization and writing if you want them to, and that's an hourly charge. Or, you know, once they've surfaced all of the grants, then you go ahead and decide whether you want to do the submission on your own or not. And we've been through all the stuff manually. I spent a dozen hours going through all the different government websites and concluded that unless you do this for a living, you really don't want to comb through all the grants. The USDA was a rich source of grants for geothermal, which surprised me until I realized that's where the co-ops get their grant funding from. So, you know, anyway,
Rural energy is a big deal.
Energy Northwest is working with us on the grant search. The second thing Energy Northwest is working with us on is the developers. So they're working on getting a meeting set up with us, them, and at least one developer. And I know of another developer that I want to talk to so we can find out, is there really any interest?
So I have a question. It sounds like we've been talking to Energy Northwest about grants for
About a month and a half. Yeah.
I think more than that, because you and I talked about this in June, right after my vacation.
Mhm.
So, I mean, now it's almost mid-August. So
It took us a month to get the contract signed
Okay.
with Energy Northwest and get all that executed.
okay. And then, so what's, I mean, either there's a grant or that we can apply for or not. I mean, what,
Currently, there are none open that we can apply for.
okay,
We could apply for a lot of stuff, but it wouldn't be germane to this. There's a lot of things we could apply for, but the key here is that it's got to be a specific geothermal development that's not entirely limited. So some of the grants that are available for geothermal are like 10% grants. Some of them are loan only, and the loan is not forgivable. Others are loan and loans forgivable. So we're sorting through all that. But as of today, they have not identified one that would be kind of hitting the sweet spot on this for us.
okay,
And that I talked to Sarah last Wednesday. And that was the last update I had from her.
okay. So that's a dead end at this point.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch that open up out of the Inflation Reduction Act, where USDA, DOE, and there's one other agency where they haven't characterized their loans yet. They haven't put out a NOFO, a notice of funding opportunity. And we expect there to be funding opportunities for geothermal in that. So it's just not announced yet.
Okay.
And they were thinking, Energy Northwest, that is, was thinking November for those.
Mhm.
I don't have any insight.
Okay. Okay. And have we looked into any of the state funding through the Climate Commitment Act? The
We have.
State Clean Energy Fund?
We have, and yeah, it's a matter of, there's nothing in there really that fits what we're doing. And I've worked with the fellows that work in the state DNR to look for that. That's how we initially got hooked up with all of the people, including Energy Northwest, on that grant funding piece.
Okay,
Was through the state.
okay,
So that's where we are on long-term source development. I'm just going to keep pursuing that. We are also still working on a grant search for a capital a capital investment to make a line extension to an uneconomic customer. And I think we've talked about that before. Similarly, we do not have a grant that we can apply to for that. And but I've got commitment from the Department of Commerce and others at the state level that if we get something, they'd be very interested in supplying match. And so I've got some excitement built around that. We just don't have the big capital grant there. And that's going to have to be a $15 to $20 million grant to pay for the capital improvement. Now switching gears a little bit, because all of that was from the lens of municipalization. How do you shift the whole look from when it's economically viable to how do you make it economically viable? So now the next thing I want to talk about is a little different kind of growth, and that's on the electric side. We've been meeting with SSA. They're a big developer out at Cherry Point, big landowner. They own about 1,100 acres out there. They've had that parcel up for sale for a long time. The feedback is from all the people, yeah, we'd love to buy land there. We'd love to do a project there, but we don't need 1,100 acres. And so now SSA is looking at possibly subdividing that and proceeding forward with 9, 10, 11 parcels. And we've been working with them on what that would take in terms of transmission for both water and electric, and what we would need to do to supply them potable water. We've also helped point them in the direction of where they need to go for sewer and stormwater, and so they know what's going on there. And we will be meeting with the owner's engineer to help them lay out that sometime late this year. And they're thinking December, possibly into January next year to get preliminary layouts before they start talking to the county about any kind of subdivision. So I believe that we're going to have some kind of project is going to succeed out at Cherry Point, probably in 2024. And that's about as definitive as I can get. Don't know what it would look like. They've talked to all kinds of hydrogen people. They've talked to recycling folks. They've talked to a number of people that you would think we would want to have in there. And I just don't know who they're going to get. Now, this is all parallel with AltaGas, and we don't know what they're going to do with their property once they convert the Intalco plant to a greenfield or a brownfield, or however they're going to finally manage that. And then what they do with it. They have a similar sized holding. So between the two, you're looking at over 2,000 acres. And of course, not all that's buildable. A lot of it's wetland, but that is there. And tacked on to the whole Cherry Point discussion, in September, Bonneville is going to come out. We've asked them to purchase the 230 lines and substation going to the Intalco site. And they have yet to decide whether or not they want to keep it, but they're going to have a site visit in September. And we know about the date, and we've offered to help show them around and show them what we're looking at. And we'll keep you guys informed as to what's going on with regards to that. So there, I want to stop and just go for questions.
How informed are some of the other county leaders and the port and what's happening with these two sites?
Well, I mean, the port has economic development as a function, and I know that Don Goldberg is in a lot of these conversations. So I would assume the port is fully involved. Other county leaders I can't speak to. I just don't know.
Okay.
I have not taken it upon myself to inform of this because you meet with the developer shares stuff with you.
Yeah.
And what we try and do is help it along.
How much staff time are we spending on this? And how are we recovering costs associated with doing this work?
So almost all the staff time on this is mine and Brian's, and we are charging out as general overheads. So that's the accounting mechanism.
So all of our ratepayers are paying for it.
That is correct.
Okay, even though this is essentially SSA and this is directly benefiting them, because in order to sell their property, they need to have utilities running to the parcels. So why aren't we just charging SSA directly for our time associated with this?
Well, normally in economic development activities, there's a lot of pre-work that's done. And that includes meeting with them and, just kind of talking through options and laying stuff out. That usually is done as a general overhead for any agency that's working with the developer. When they actually sit down and say, okay, we want to start submitting plans and, let's get a group together and here's our road improvements we need to make. And, how about relocations? At that point, we would say, okay, we need to figure out a charging mechanism and we would charge them for that. We're not there yet. This is still really preliminary.
Would this activity be compatible with the strategic plan objective to diversify our portfolio?
It would.
And Cherry Point.
What we've talked to SSA and AltaGas about is both the electric side, extending off of either a 115 or a potential 230. And then on the water side, both industrial water and potable plants. So the discussion with SSA was specifically about, we can supply the sites with industrial water relatively straightforward. If you want potable water, we would offer a package plant and serve that. So it's a direct attempt at diversification. That's in fact why I'm pursuing this.
I'd like to return to the conversation on energy. You began your general manager report with, and just sharing my perspective. And I want to treat it as, there's things that we each three commissioners have that are unique to our background. And so it's more for the purpose of discussion than really a opinion, so to speak, about the direction that the PUD should take. So I wanted to give that disclaimer. And the thing that I felt early on, years ago, 4 years ago, was that we have a supply crisis on energy happening for public power. For me, what happened with Intalco's attempts even back then, and then again, as a result of this effort with Blue Wolf, was really cemented that. And so supply is our challenge has never been a question for me. That was it for me. It has never been a question. We would not be able to pursue municipalization because supply would be the issue for municipalization. And having been an entrepreneur, having been a small player in a big world, I feel that there's some parallels for the Whatcom PUD. We are a very small player in a big world. We are a small PUD, and in terms of the amount of power we consume, electric power we consume. And these other PUDs are certainly friendly with us, more than happy to help us. But when power becomes available, they're not going to call Chris and say, Chris, I remember you saying you needed 200 megawatts. We could go for this because we're Chilean, but we thought we'd mention it to you first. That's not going to happen. Same with the other big players, Snohomish, so on. So I'm just thinking about this quandary because I've been in a world where I was a very small player, and I had to access supply myself. And the pain of having to see supplier after supplier be attracted to the big boys, right? Because they provide them security. So you have to be innovative. That's the message that I'm trying to get at. And so I applaud you looking at things like geothermal. And I just encourage my colleagues and our organization to recognize how important it is that we're going to have to be clever. If we're going to get supply, we're going to have to be clever. And that's just a general statement. So
I agree with you. I mean, I think that with this supply discussion, especially with geothermal, I mean, the more I sit through these meetings at WPUDA and Energy Northwest and the Public Power Council, having our supply in our backyard Yes, we're still gonna have to invest in transmission, but having geothermal supply of, whether it's 60 megawatts or 200 megawatts, I mean, that would be an enormous win for our county. And I agree with Commissioner Deshmani that we're gonna have to be innovative about it. And yeah, there might not be any grants that we're seeing right now, but I mean, look at what's going on with climate right now. I think it's beginning to scare people that didn't even think they cared about climate 10 years ago. There's a tremendous amount of private capital going into clean energy projects. I mean, there's a lot of optimism around this new advanced geothermal. It is, it's a baseload firm, zero carbon resource. So, who are our potential partners? Is this something we want to talk to PSE about? Is this, how do we get creative about making this happen? Because, you and I first started talking about this in April. 5 months have passed. A calendar year is going to go by before we know it. We just don't have that time, and so, I don't know. I sent you an email a little while ago saying, how can I help with this? And I'd say that I would take that seriously too, in terms of harnessing us as resources too. I mean, should we be talking to our state representatives about getting something in the state budget?
Federal.
Should we be reaching out to Maria Cantwell's office? We've created good connections with already on broadband. I mean, let's get scrappy is what I'm thinking on this, because it's not going to happen unless we dig deeper. So, I do appreciate the update. I appreciate that we're scratching the surface, and these projects are hard. I mean, the updates on Ruby Flats and the Energy Northwest meetings are, it's painful that we can't build, what is it, 150 megawatt solar facility. We're like 6 years into that project.
Yep.
And so, I mean, as a society, we need to start doing better on these projects. So there's my rant for the day. Might not be my only one, but and I think as far as the SSA property and Cherry Point, I always just get really nervous about Cherry Point, because every single time I touch base with anyone from the Lummi Nation, I get a pretty clear message that they do not want development at Cherry Point, and they have been very successful at preventing development there. And you would know more about this, Atul, since you're on the Planning Commission. But I worry about getting ahead of ourselves on that one without really making sure that we're involving the Lummi Nation in these discussions. And I don't know how involved Don Goldberg is. I know Tap Hall has tried to have those conversations, and I don't think has been very successful. But it's a reality. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, not without opening up a whole another conversation, no. So on Cherry Point, it's absolutely important to recognize that getting things done there has been challenging, and it really gets back to what you said about it. If it takes that much, I could do a 150 megawatt project, solar project, and outside of Tri-Cities, and then it also points to how difficult it will be to do new clean energy industrial work in Cherry Point, and that's another discussion.
Okay, yeah, we're way past your 10 minutes general manager report, but I mean, I can't help but bring it up, because it's just, we just can't pretend that that's not part of the dynamic there. So I'm concerned that we need to be, we just can't proceed with our head in the sand on that issue, because it will come back.
I think there are some dimensions to this discussion that we would need to hold outside of the public view that would be subject to litigation.
Okay,
And I'd like to talk to you guys about that.
sure, okay. Yeah, okay.
It's also with the county updating its comprehensive plan starting in a year and a half. I would expect this to be cornerstone of that discussion.
Which-
Yeah.
Which, yeah, and the kind of connection to the, what Mike Kaufman likes to talk about, the utility chapter of the comprehensive plan. Too, and giving some special treatment to utility projects, kind of like what the state has proposed with AFSAC. And actually the PUD Association opposed it, it passed. Some of that policy passed. Recognizing
And
that.
now we have another
Ener-
layer of state approval to go through.
So, yeah, the point being that, there's a lot of people working on it. Maybe some of the mitigating actions don't actually mitigate, as Chris has suggested. But the point is that we have to try to get energy infrastructure and other infrastructure built, and it's being held up.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that, I'd like to close the general manager's report
Yeah, sure.
and kind of move on to new business. You'll notice I didn't talk about
We still have
fiber.
old business.
Pardon me, old business.
Yeah.
We didn't, you'll notice I didn't talk about fiber. That it's in the strategic plan, but it's also our next item of discussion.
Great, and Andrew's all ready to go.
Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning.
I have a presentation I want to share with you, but before I do that, I'll just give you some current events. So we're currently waiting for the contract with WISBO, the Washington State Broadband Office, for our Point Roberts project. We did get correspondence last week indicating that they are short-staffed and they're working as fast as they possibly can to get the contracts and scope of works developed with all of the entities that were awarded in the recent fund or round. So more to come on that, but I wanted to let you know that they are working on that. And then item number 2, Councilmember Galloway provided staff, or excuse me, the steering committee with a resolution identifying approaches to expand broadband access in Whatcom County. So the steering committee had an opportunity to weigh in on that resolution, and the county council will be looking at that later today in their 2 p.m. meeting.
And if I can characterize that, it really was about conditions where you'd have people sharing trenches and when you cut roads and things like that. It wasn't necessarily, underwriting capital costs for broadband or anything like that. It was bits and pieces of all kinds of different policies that we've all talked about and are in favor of.
Thanks, Chris. And then the third item I wanted to share with you today is just where we are with all the federal broadband funding that we've been talking about over the last couple of months. So I thought I'd start with how did we get to where we are today and what's happening right now, and then what's coming down the pipe. And so if you recall, Congress essentially said, we want every home and business in America to be connected with a reliable internet connection. And the federal agency that's charged with carrying that effort out is NTIA, or the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And NTIA released a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, not geared towards public or local entities like the PUD or the port, but the eligible entities to respond to their NOFO would be like the state of Washington. And you might recall the major mapping effort that we were contributing to over the last year. And so what the state was doing in attempt to respond to that NOFO was identifying literally every home and business in Washington state down to the lat long coordinate. And so they gathered that data and sent it back to NTIA, and NTIA said of the $42 billion, Washington is eligible for or will be receiving 1.24 or $1.2 billion. So not million, but Washington state alone will be getting 1.2 billion out of the BEAD funding, which is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment funding mechanism. So that's what's happened. And now we are today looking at the state of Washington developing what's called initial proposal, which is that first chunk here on the timeline on the screen. And just to make it easier, we'll just call that the proposal. And the proposal is basically the state of Washington through the state broadband office coming up with what they're going to do with that 1.2 billion. How are they going to spend it? There's some other things, but part of that is what's called a challenge process. And so they'll develop their proposal between now and the end of December of this year and send that back to NTIA for approval. And so in that, like I said, we'll understand the mechanism of how that challenge process will look. And the other details of their proposal will be sent back to NTIA. NTIA, assuming everything checks out, will say, please proceed. That will open the gate for the state to conduct the challenge process. We'll talk more about the challenge process here in just a minute, but we'll go through that effort, and then the state will finalize their proposal, send it back to NTIA for another check-in. And once NTIA says, yes, everything looks good, your challenge process looks great, how you're going to distribute the funds looks good, that will give the state broadband office there at the end of Q4 2025 the ability to open the grant application. So I wanted to show this timeline because we thought it gives a really good snapshot of what's coming down the pipe, but also another reminder that we won't see those grant dollars until the earliest Q4 2025, but possibly even into the first part of 2026. So parts of the challenge process, what will happen is the state will develop a repository or a major list of all of the eligible locations in the state. And then the challenge process, I mean, maybe challenge isn't the right way to think about it. It's more of a verification to ensure nobody's left out. And we want to make sure anyone who's eligible to receive broadband funding is on that list. And if you're not on that list, it basically means that you're covered or you have adequate broadband. And there'll be a challenge process, not only for like the PUD could submit challenge for address points that we know are not receiving broadband in our community, but the internet service providers can challenge as well, or challenge our challenge. So it'll be complex, but like I said, the state will develop a framework for how they'll determine this.
You know, Andrew, I just got to say here, just to defend the ISPs a little bit, frequently they've got business plans to make investments in certain areas. And it's fair for them to say, look, we're going to do this and we're going to serve these people. You shouldn't be putting federal grant money at that. You should put it someplace else where we're not serving. And we know that in fact does happen. We saw some of it legitimately happening up in Point Roberts, where Whidbeytel had corporate commitment to do all kinds of work up there that we didn't necessarily know about. And so we modified our project based on their informal challenge. They basically told us about it and we changed it. So, you know, this challenge process, it serves a lot of legitimate purposes. And we just got to make sure that when we get through with this, that we're able to, you know, adequately represent the needs of our community.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I won't go through all of these, but these are the different types of allowable challenges. And so, you know, like availability, speed, the technology type. So if a address point, you know, says that they're getting gigabit speeds, but we say, well, or the homeowner says, well, you know, we're getting less than 25.3, for example, in the challenge process developed by the state, they could say, well, you need to provide evidence of, and this is just a hypothetical, you know, 3 different speed tests on 3 different days, you know, whatever their framework is. Or if the technology type is indication that they have fiber, but they're actually they have no fiber and they're actually using satellite, you know, what do we need to provide in the challenge process to prove that, basically. So that's kind of part of what will be coming through that between now and the end of December. And so here's kind of a real world example. This map just shows the areas by percent served based on the most recent providers data up to the FCC. And so the red areas are kind of where we usually look to start. And what we've learned is that the areas in the blue, there are still address points in these blue areas that if you weren't, you know, checking in with your stakeholders, you wouldn't know that there were some address points in these hex bins or these geographic areas that are actually unserved. And an example of that is Ravencrest, which is a community we've talked about a bit before on previous meetings, and submitted a recent application. Were not awarded, but this is a good example because these address points were lit up as served in a data release about maybe 8 months ago or so. And this is an example where an internet service provider said that they had reliable internet at their home. And when we went and talked to the community members, or one of the community members, they indicated, well, no, we don't have that service. We actually have to rely on, satellite. And so what you're looking at is a challenge process where we would go back in and say, well, no, they don't have the speeds or the technology that a provider is indicating here. We want to submit a challenge indicating that these are going to be on that list of eligible address points that we had talked about a little bit ago. So that's an example, just one example in our community that we know about.
Yeah, this example, to put an even finer point on it, the internet service provider that serves this area claims that they have fiber to the home in this area. In fact, they have no fiber at all. And when we talked to the service provider, they said, yeah, we had hired this out, paid $150,000 for a consultant to do the input. We know some of our input is flawed, but we're not going to pay to go back and fix it. So this is exactly the kind of thing that you would challenge. The data's wrong, and we'll go back and pick on it. And, that'll be kind of the basis for why these addresses would be eligible for a BEAD grant.
And prove why the approach that we take with the USDA funding as well, which is self-policed infrastructure funding, is a mistaken approach. First principles of it is mistaken, and why this is so much better of a way to figure out who's being served and to keep track of people being served. There needs to be the same kind of oversight happening over USDA funding as well. So, of course, I know Commissioner Brown's worked on that. So,
RDOF. You
Yeah.
mean RDOF?
Yeah.
RDOF is USDA.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't.
Yeah, the area that's shaded white there, I think, is an RDOF area that's adjacent to the blue.
yeah, but we don't touch that, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. We are essentially, it's not eligible for additional grants because it's already been granted federal money.
But I'm saying that that's profoundly misguided because self-policing doesn't work.
I'm not going to argue that point, but for us, it's
No.
definitely tilting at windmills for us to go after
And
that particular thing.
I recognize that to some degree, but I'm just stating that self-policing doesn't work.
Is this the last slide?
I think he has one more slide.
Oh, the last slide is just what we talked about already. The next step for us is to look out for the challenge process guidance from the state. And I know the state broadband office has recently said that they will make the challenge process public and solicit feedback from stakeholders. So more information to come to you at the commission, and we'll keep you updated. And that's my report.
I do have one update that's fresh as of yesterday. I talked to Mark Vasconi yesterday out in the field. We met at a port fiber project, and he is very much interested in the initial what they call disadvantaged, or the counties. Andrew, what was the term they used?
Distressed
counties. That's where all the initial BEAD funding would go. They've really backed off of that. And now what they want to look at is individual clusters of customers. And I talked to Mark about the Ravenscrest, about a couple of mobile home parks that we found that are not served, that are embedded in an ISP's area, and all these things. And he said, yes, that's the perfect project. That's exactly what we want to look at. So I have some hope that no matter what, we're going to put in a first request whenever the BEAD NOFO comes out. And now I have more hope that we will get some funding for
In 2050.
it in 2025. Yeah.
That's right. I'm off by decades.
It's okay.
That last one's passed, I think. So the thing that, and I'm delighted to hear that, because otherwise we're looking at even a couple years later than that. I want to talk about 2024. And into 2025. So I imagine at least a year of a period where we might have completed work. And that there's no stable pipeline. So I would like the team, the broadband team. And I would say, let's collaborate with the board on this subject is that, what, there'll be a gap in our buildup. So let's try to figure out a way to fill that gap with a project and alternative sources of funding. And
Well,
so
remember, Commissioner, our Point Roberts project, which is a big project for us, is really going to get kicked off in 2024. That's when we think that all the contracts will be signed and we'll be doing engineering design and then construction. So we'll have our hands full 2024, probably into the first part of 2025 for actual construction.
okay.
I'm also confused because at our last meeting, we talked about BEAD funding and the gap in funding. And we agreed that there was going to be an update on the LUD model at this meeting and the work that you guys have been doing over the last year. And there's been
We haven't
no
done
update.
anything more on the LED model since we last talked,
Since we last talked 2 weeks ago or in the last year?
in the last 2 weeks.
Okay,
So we had talked to the Ravenscrest people, offered them the LED model and they declined. That's the latest update on the LED model.
I get that. I guess I'm wondering what have we done over the last calendar year on LUDs? The last time we had substantive discussion about it was a year ago.
We've really been focusing on getting grant money so that we don't have to burden our customers with LED
I
payments.
get that, but we've also been in a holding pattern for many months, waiting for NOFOs to come out, waiting for grants to get to us. And I'm wondering what we can do to provide value to our community while we're in those waiting patterns, because it feels like there can't be that much work while we're just waiting for NOFOs and for grant funding to come in. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing that. But we put a lot of effort into discussing the LUD model, looking into legal aspects around it. I guess I'm fine if the answer is this is just something we're not going to do.
Yeah, one of the things that would be helpful from my perspective on the LUD model is that we had a lot of back and forth. And I'm glad you presented to Ravenscrest. You've learned a few things from that. It would be good to know what would be the ideal LUD project from your perspective. And then once we discuss that, maybe the commissioners can go work our communities to identify a suitable matching project for the LUD funding. That's something that I'm just bringing up today, but I'd like you to think about that. If you were to identify, what is a good LUD project, then maybe we can identify a project that matches, and we'll want time with Andrew, obviously, to figure out, look at the map to help identify what the communities would be best suited.
And remember, when you talk to a community, you've
I'm
got
sorry to
to.
interrupt. I just want to complete the thought. I just realized I didn't explain one other thing that maybe you hadn't heard before. Some years ago, I went and was talking to lots of individual groups about broadband, and I'm fine with the approach we've taken. But one of the ideas I had was to build little local loops all over the county. Working off of the ISP's existing mid-mile infrastructure, while we were waiting for the backbone to parallel with building the backbone. So I talked to lots of people. What I'm trying to say.
So when we talk to a community like Ravenscrest, as just for instance, so there was a community that is relatively advantaged from a socioeconomic perspective, right? So they would be probably more likely to be able to pay the property assessment for the LUD. And their question was, is there any possibility of us getting a federal grant to do this instead? And when we said it's possible, then they declined the LUD. So when you go talk to a community about the LUD, you know, bear in mind that you're going to want to say it's possible that we could get grant funding at some point in the future. It might be 5 years, it might be more. Do you still want to proceed? So that would be a point blank question I would ask them. If they would wait 5 years to have somebody else pay for it, you know, ask them.
So I think that I would like to circle back to understanding where we're at with the LUD. And I mean, things like that seem like we're putting the cart before the horse, because we don't even know, I don't even know what I would tell a community we could offer right now. And so, I mean, maybe my memory is fuzzy, but I thought that in our last commission meeting, we agreed to get an update on the work that's been done on the LUD model, so that we could make some decisions as a commission about what we were doing going forward.
I
So-
bet to you, I will get that next
Okay,
time.
it's just, it just feels like when we talk about these things and we agree to get them on the agenda and then they're not on the agenda, it's like we're just wasting our breath asking for things. So I appreciate the update on BEAD, but I'd like to close the loop on what we're doing on the LUD model.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything else, Andrew?
Nope, that's it from me. Thanks, everyone.
Next item on the agenda is the adjudication update, and I'd like to kick it over to John.
Sure.
Before
So
we do that, could I just ask, is there any updates on the port and their broadband efforts and their efforts with the county?
Yeah, actually,
Sorry.
that's fine.
so the county, which is interesting because the author of the letter is the person who is their representative on our broadband steering committee. That person authored a letter and made us aware of it yesterday, and it's going before the county today, basically saying that if you want money from the county, you need to go to the EDI funds to get it. Initially, what the steering committee had opined, what we wanted to do was, look, we didn't get the grant from the state or the feds. So there's nothing to spend the $4 million AR, is it ARA?
ARPA.
It's ARPA, the ARPA grant, where they've got millions sitting there. Would you like to spend that 4 million on a project? And then they tasked Gina and Andrew with going back and scoping out a project. And we've spent a lot of time doing that. And now they're basically saying, well, we're not interested. So apparently they have other things they want to spend the ARPA money on. That's fine. But it looks like it's very unlikely that we will get anything from the county in terms of funding in the off cycle. And we just found that out yesterday.
But they're holding their commitment to, they're providing match for the Point Roberts project.
There's some match for that, yes,
Okay.
but what they were providing was $4 million match for a $12 million project, so it would have been a total of 16 million.
Right.
And now they're just they're going to spend that money on something else, and if we want any money in the future from them, we need to go through the EDI process, and that has been a dry hole. Gina has hit on that a few times, and basically they're just not accepting it. So the county's saying, see the EDI funds, the EDI folks are saying, see the county, it doesn't fit EDI. So that's the latest update on the port's efforts to get funding from the county. And as I said, that's as of yesterday.
I don't know, but I believe that the Councilmember Galloway and Buchanan are very focused on trying to get some near-term actions on the housing situation. And I think they're looking every place they can to just scrape money back. And one of those places is ARPA funds. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
John.
Not a big update. Some of the things we can discuss in executive session when time's right. This involves litigation. The college has announced that you may be aware they're delayed the adjudication filing until the spring, winter, spring. It's not surprising in that they finally got their FTEs and authorized and funded in July. Now they can go forward and hire and all that goes along with that. I am regularly having a conversation with the tribal council about once a month that sometimes they forget and we have to reschedule the time. We have some discussions on some collaborative projects that we might come to an agreement on to do. We're working through that now. It's not an easy lift to find where we might have agreements on approaches at this point, but can detail that in executive session. I have a call scheduled for tomorrow with the A community just to check in, try to stay with Bill Clark and Eric Croft, their council, just to keep a loop on that. We have met with Jay Manning and county staff on providing our observations and feedback on the Anchor QEA study of long-term supply options in the river. We saw some fundamental data collection concerns along with assumptions underlying the analysis, which was a very high level analysis by their own recognition. And they acknowledged what our comments were, but still felt it was a beneficial effort on the county's part to have some commencement of discussion of some solutions for water supply, which continues to be related, but not directly a part of the adjudication case, which is adjudication just about your priority and seniority of the rights, but to solve the river issues and in-stream flow issues, you have to start talking about supply, particularly as Robin would note, pending or current or ongoing climate issues. So I guess that would be the sum of my feedback at the adjudication update outside of executive session.
So, what is the impact of the delay? And I think if we were to guess here, we probably would say spring is also early, right?
I'm not confident that what they're saying until it actually happens.
Steve, what was the number you told me 2 years ago? Was it like, I think you said it's gonna take a year longer. I don't remember. I think it was offhand. You said something like that. And anyway, so I don't know if you want to update your estimate. But anyway, whenever it happens, how is the delay of a year impacting Whatcom PUD?
Not adversely. In terms of the adjudication and the core of what adjudication is. In terms of a litigation preparation, it's allowing more time and being deliberate, strategic. It also allows us the opportunity to explore avenues of where we find some collaborative processes. So, things we're dealing with council for Lummi, for instance, that are located in San Francisco, Montana, Idaho, as well as here. We have to get them all on the phone. We have to have a conversation. They have to go back to Lummi. They have to come back to us. They say they got fully vetted internally. We have to set up a meeting. So it just allows some time. We're a little more nimble, candidly, in working on these issues than some of the other parties at the table. Yes, that's fine, but it allows more time to work on some of these things. Some of these things aren't just Chris, John, and Steve coming up with an idea and sharing and saying, well, we'll come back to the commission and here's a settlement, or some partial project. It's developing technical concepts for scopes, and part of what you saw in the claims today, for instance. And so we have to develop that. We have to go back and share. They have to look at that. So there's a process that I think candidly the delay allows some time room for that. But it also allows us to continue to develop and maintain relations.
So if I can characterize, Commissioner, on the legal front, it's actually a good thing. Because it does buy us time to do that. One of the places where it's not a good thing, although it's not really a bad thing, when you look at the legislation that came out last year, there was funding that was granted to the county directly to help them.
Sorry.
And there was funding that was to the watershed management group through the county that are both contingent on DOE, Department of Ecology, filing
That's what
the
I was referring to,
adjudication.
yeah.
So we've had the discussion at the watershed board. In fact, this last meeting that we just had, I brought it up. You know, I wasn't confident that any of that money would be freed up before the next fiscal year.
Mhm.
So one of the things, and this is why it's, you know, not good, but also not bad. We're not going to be able to spend the money this year on the studies that we had hoped to. So that's not good. The not bad part is that it's an opportunity for all of us to get back to our legislative group and get the proviso to roll that money into the following years. So you're going to be seeing that come through. Now, whether or not they're successful, I'm not prejudging that. It's a legislative process. It's making sausage. You don't want to see what goes into it, but you know, does the sausage taste good at the end?
I think the general feeling is that given the conditions that were sought to have the funding conditioned on the filing of the adjudication and delay is no part of the parties locally. The general feeling is that the legislative staffs and electeds
It's going to be
push
straightforward.
roll it over the next budget cycle. But the groups are already talking about in the high levels, how we might what projects might be available for some of that stuff. Those funding.
I want to also repeat again, a desire to help and to be a resource for the community. Somewhat analogous to what the kind of work that Dave Olson does in helping water associations. But to have a similar ability to provide, be a place for community members who are particularly small businesses on wells, to have a place and have resources to be able to ask questions about what the adjudication means for them and how to get ready for it. Is the Ag Water Board doing that job? And if they aren't, somebody needs to provide that. I don't think the county, I know the county's not doing that job. And this is a case where, you know, people are going to fall through the cracks. And they're going to suffer because of that. And possibly some small bit, I mean, we've already done enough in our community, I'm not blaming anybody, but we've already done enough to devastate small business. I mean, COVID was the best example of that. And I think we need to, local government at every level needs to be more engaged on helping and supporting small business. And so I would like to put the task to staff to figure out how to provide a service to the community. And then publish it everywhere. Everywhere. So, I mean, places that we wouldn't typically even publish. And say, we'll be your helpline. Because I think we owe it to the community to do that. We understand this adjudication process. And we need to be a place where people can get important questions answered. That could be their, you know, personal and family's livelihood.
So and let me just remind the commission that we get our funding from our water customers. And they're the ones who are paying for this. So if we want to set something up that helps the community writ
Sure.
large, we don't have a funding mechanism
We'll
for
get it.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll go lobby for it.
The second thing is that is exactly what the county executive was talking about using the county part of the legislative grant for, was that kind of outreach and building and staffing for it, having call centers and, you know, websites and all of that stuff. So at the county level, I think the county is the appropriate body to do exactly that kind of outreach you're describing, not the PUD. That'd
Okay,
be my recommendation.
I'm okay with that. I don't care who does it.
I mean, I think it's worth having a conversation with the county to understand who's leading that effort. They don't have very deep expertise in
Or
water
staffing.
or staffing. So if they, I mean, if they want to give us that money so we can staff up to do it, to me, it feels like the PUD has deeper relationships with the people that we would need to be doing outreach to. I agree. I understand what you're saying about funding, Chris. We can't just, get blood out of turnip and getting,
Well, and just remember that, what we're talking about here is at its core, notice of a judicial action, right? People have to know that they're involved in the adjudication. And the county and DOE need to figure that out. They're the ones who are responsible for it. I do not want to put the utility on the hook for someone saying, well, look, you guys were delegated this authority to tell us everything and make sure we were all involved and I never knew.
Mhm.
And then we get sued over that.
well, we're not process servers. That's not what we would
But
be
that's a
doing.
big part of what this outreach is making sure everybody gets served. And then they go, oh my God, who do I talk to? Here's the county number. They call in and they talk to the county.
Let's put it this way, I think,
Mm.
we're not giving legal advice. You have a form, you should be contacting ecology or contacting your legal counsel to assist you in preparing this. We can't give you legal advice. In fact, we're a party in the action. So we would be considered biased if we were giving them really direct information. It's one reason why the county is a suitable party to do
Mm.
this outreach. They're not a party to the action. Having said that, you also run the risk of multiple parties having communications at risk being inconsistent. Ecology is engaged in a massive outreach. In fact, they have to disclose their forms for filings and the preparation, have comments back. You have the egg board, egg community, you have county do it. What seems to me is a worthwhile discussion is to talk to Sat Paul, talk to Robin McPherson, say, how can we collaborate and have an efficient, unified outreach program to ensure we're getting the messages out to all the parties in the community?
Mhm.
And because you're going to risk too many voices in the wilderness.
Yeah, and I don't want that. Yeah, I get both of your points. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think continuing to put pressure on the political pressure on the county to make sure that they're using the funding that they were allocated through the.
But the point that why I brought this up earlier is that that's been delayed now.
Yes.
And so it makes sense to me to find some way to get that process started rather than wait a year because of the way the legislation was written. And so, what I'm just saying is that I'm noticing a gap. And it's actually, we could make good use of the gap by reducing the likelihood that people are disenfranchised or unaware of what's about to hit them. And so that's why I was bringing this up is that maybe the PUD could fill that gap. It doesn't need to be the PUD. We can support some process to fill the gap, but I'm just saying we have a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of this extra time to make sure less people, to increase the likelihood that less people are caught by surprise.
I think it's a worthwhile follow-up conversation either directly with the county, with ecology, or
I'll
as part
do
of the
my part
watershed
in that
management
regard, yeah.
board. And I'll be talking to Tyler at some point, Robin McPherson, I can bring that up too. Related to that, I forgot to mention, we were talking about a CLE in September. It was on the eve of the Waputa water workshop. Tribes were not available, as far as John Kapoor, for some of their council, and also they have federal team in town that week, so they were not available. We did not want to do that without having a tribal perspective at the CLE. We're giving schedules, and we're now looking into January for that CLE on water law, done locally.
I mean,
I'd like to attend.
Yeah, I know that. That's why I was kind of reminded me, and you recall that, so I was letting you know it'll be delayed.
I think one thing to, that could be helpful is there has been some press coverage about adjudication, but I think it's still confusing. I think most things related to the law are frankly scary and confusing for a lot of people. And so, we're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of money being spent on adjudication right now. I think doing one of us writing some sort of an op-ed to explain what's going on. I guess there's some decent coverage right now on it, but it does seem like we need to continue to have a communication strategy about it. So, I mean, at the very least, I can make a commitment to follow up with some members of the county council just to see what they're doing, if anything, who on their staff are going to be working on this. And I agree with what John said about how we probably are not the appropriate person to be doing that because we are, a party. And the county doesn't have any water rights. They're in a,
Tiny
well,
water rights.
okay.
Yeah.
But they're a minor player and, you know, we could be seen as, you know, using our position to, you know, we just
Right, sure.
don't want to get into
And
that.
we've gotten in trouble in the past in terms of perception many, many years ago, but yeah, so we want to be careful.
Well, let me
to be
make a
fair-
commitment with Chris that we'll follow up with the county and with ecology and see what their community strategy is and what we can push along and see if in 2 weeks we can report back what they're doing. If they aren't doing anything, we'll tell you where we're pushing and where gaps might be filled.
Okay,
So John and I have dealt almost exclusively with Hall and staff. So I think your suggestion of reaching out to other council members to find out what they're thinking and, or if they're thinking about it,
Mhm.
would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out to some members of the county council and if you do
Yeah,
that
yeah,
too,
we'll
then
team
we'll
up,
get
yeah.
a full
Yeah.
picture for what people are actually thinking. And I mean, yeah, this is an adjudication update, so we don't need to go into this, but I mean, I think there's a lot of ways we can help support the community in other ways
Yeah.
that don't involve the adjudication necessarily.
Absolutely.
So that's my update.
Okay, let's move on to new business.
First thing up is our first half financial report. Annette, take it away.
Good morning, Commission. Let me share my screen with you. Sorry about that.
We can take just a minute break. Is that all right? Minute pause here?
I certainly think that's appropriate.
Yeah, just take a minute. Pause. Commissioner, will be right. We'll be right back. You know, I can't help but say this, but you two guys are like the Eagles on the Muppet Show. Oh, yeah, no big deal, no big deal. Okay, Nat.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners. So this is a standard presentation we do every year. Just kind of give you a half yearly update of where we're sitting between, you know, halfway through the year compared to our budget. And so, you know, I like to start off with pictures of kind of how we do. And so part of our process when we pull water in from the river was we run them through these basins for basically the bigger dirt to settle out. So every once in a while we have to drain these basins and do a wash down. And so this is a picture of one of our former water operators, Bob, doing a wash down on one of the basins.
Did we just go to Q&A chat?
I'm sorry?
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then it turns out we can just barely hear you which is interesting because we hear you fine.
We hear you fine in the room.
Okay. I'm not sure what to do about that.
Just keep going.
Okay. So what I'm going to touch on today is the billing structures of our different utilities, operations, and then of course capital. The billing structures, I just want to touch on some things that if you've been here a while, we throw terminologies and ideas and theories around, and I just want to kind of make sure we step back and explain how some of these work. And so as far as our billing structures, we basically have 3 businesses we're running, and it's 3 different utilities. That's the industrial water, the Grandview, and the electric. And so the industrial water is one of our big utility where we pull water out of the Nooksack at 2 different water treatment plants, pump it through some really 24-inch big lines out to the Cherry Point. And then along those lines, we have some connections for some irrigation customers. So that's one of our businesses. And both of those, in the industrial and the irrigation, there's fixed fees that we charge, and then we have usage fees associated with that. The next one is the Grandview, and that's a separate water system that services small industrial water systems up in the Grandview business area. And that provides both non-potable and potable. The industrial system is all non-potable. And then in 2019, you'll probably remember, we actually did a connection there because the industrial system is a very stable, a very reliable system, and the Grandview non-potable was starting to have some problems. So we did a line extension and hooked into the Grandview non-potable system. So that in the Grandview system has fixed and variable pieces, both associated with potable and the non-potable system. And then the last one is our our electric. And this is the one I really wanted to kind of make sure we all kind of understood. We receive the bulk of our power from the Bonneville Power Association, and that provides power to our electric utility and also to our 2 water treatment plants. And so through different metering and different worksheets we can get down to how much it actually costs to supply to the electric utility. And so what we do every month is we break that out. Okay, this goes to our electric utility, and this amount stays and is provided to our 2 water treatment plants. So along with that power is the transmission, and then we can also calculate taxes. So that's what we consider is the pass-through. So whatever our costs are on that power, transmission, and taxes, we pass through directly to Phillips. So everything that we collect to actually support our utility, the overhead, the labor, the capital, the operating, we recover through the general services, which is our fee that is attached to those pass-through costs. So 2 things to keep in mind there that I really wanted to point out is if BPA, sometimes they have surcharges, sometimes they have credits, sometimes there's true ups, those costs get directly passed through to our electric utility. And then the other piece that I really want to point out is if we have an additional fee in the electric utility, it only impacts that general services amount. So if we have $100,000 extra charge that we need to bring into the electric, that's a lot larger rate increase than it would be if we added $100,000 to our industrial customers. Does that make sense? Right, I'm going to assume it does. All right, and this is the same type of basin, not the exact same basin, but as it's filling up with water out of the river, kind of how that all runs. All right, so now getting into all our numbers. In our operating revenue, overall, we are under both prior year and half of our budget that we budgeted for. And the bulk of that, as you can see, is the electric pass-through amount. Excuse me. So the revenue that we are collecting for that pass-through amount is under what we budgeted and under what it was year-to-date last year. And that was due to a credit the BPA is issuing that is being passed through to Phillips 66. But if you look down in the lower right or halfway down, you can see that the actual power being passed through is slightly larger as far as the actual power, not the dollars. And then in the bottom right, it's kind of just a graphical representation of how the bills play out. And so you can see that general services piece, which is what we tack onto the bills, is a steady income every month, whereas the power and the transmission do fluctuate. And then over on the left-hand side, you can see the industrial water is over we were last year, but both Grandview and irrigation is below what we were last year.
I have a question, Annette.
Sure.
So what is this? So BPA gave Phillips 66 a, what did you call that? Why are we 16% below or lower on our revenue?
It's a credit that's being attached to our bill. And so we allocate the same portion of the bill is also allocated to that credit and being passed through. So that decreases our revenue. If you want the details of that credit, Brian is probably a little better able to answer that one.
But I guess the point is the pass through.
Yeah,
If we're off on the budget, it doesn't really matter. Credit and release the bill. If we're over, we collect, we bill and collect. So that's 100% recovery on the pass through.
mhm.
So you can look at that as kind of a standalone piece. If you look down the chart to where it has electric year-to-date megawatt hours,
Right,
you'll notice the sales is actually up
right. So
5,000 megawatt hours.
I guess I'm just, where did this credit come from BPA? What's the history of it? Why?
I remember some vague details, but I would rely on Brian to pop in on this.
Yes, I can address that. This credit's a result of a very successful year that Bonneville had in the wholesale markets. And they received several $100 million in revenue above what they budgeted for. So under the Bonneville policy that was basically set up with involvement of their customers, when their reserves, and that's where this money went, go above a certain amount, they actually rebate this dividend back to the customers for a successful year that Bonneville had. And it was, so this pass-through is a one-time thing. This year you won't see it. In fact, Bonneville's in the opposite state, but that's where it comes from. What Annette didn't mention is that basically our water plants, the electricity provided them, a portion of that rebate went back to them as well.
So all Bonneville customers got this credit from a successful year they had. This is several years ago now. They're just processing the credits now.
It was the
They're
22.
just processing a couple of years ago. It takes a while to work through the system, but yes, all Bonneville power customers, public power customers, got a rebate, and that rebate amount is based on the proportion of power that each customer buys from Bonneville.
Interesting. I wish they would have built some transmission lines instead, but
Need to
Okay.
permit those.
what?
Need
Yeah,
to permit those. That's the problem.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
All right, so on the expenses side, we also are under prior year and half of the budget. And of course, it's the opposite of that revenue decrease. And it's that cost, the purchase power cost is lower than what we, again, last year and what we budgeted for. And then the other one I wanted to point out that has the variance is the general O&M. And that is pretty typical for every report I've done for half year and that's basically the extraordinary projects that we budgeted for. Most of those are weather dependent. And so those end up being in summer and late summer when those are done. And then down below, I wanted over on the right-hand side, I listed out all the different grants, projects, planning, and development. And the blue highlighted ones are ones that are supported by grants. And then the ones that are not highlighted are just different projects that some of them strategic plans, some of them for other reasons that we just wanted to keep track of. And so we pull out in a different category. And then of course, the water adjudication is the big dollar. The other one I wanted to comment on is that electric feasibility study. It didn't show any budget, but it was actually budgeted for in 2022, but the study started at the end of 22, and then some of those costs did roll over into 23. Is there any questions on this slide? All right, so now to touch on capital. This was a 2.5 megawatt generator that we started up at the beginning of July that is part of the Ferndale sub rebuild. It's very large and very expensive and, but it just, to those of us uneducated, it looks like a big box. So with lots of wires coming out of it. But it was a really big deal that we worked on for a long time to get to. All right, so in our capital, I had a couple things to touch on. The first one, the RW 44, that is and isn't in our budget for 2023. What that was, is that's normally an extraordinary maintenance project. But as we started getting into it, a lot of it was more capital, new capital, as opposed to just repair and update. So then that budget and that project got moved up into the capital. So if you look down at the bottom, the RWM10, the pump rebuild, that also is a standing extraordinary maintenance project. We have 2 of our intake pumps in, I guess you would call the shop or at the vendor right now, that were to be rebuilt. The report came back and one for sure, and I don't think I heard the verdict on the second one, does need to be replaced. But with a 35-week lead time, that'll be pushing us into the 2024 budget. So in 2024, you will see a capital project for new pumps there. And then the last one, the E22 is the Ferndale sub. This is the rebuilding the substation over at Plant 1 that keeps going. And I actually think we see a light at the end of the tunnel. So we are hoping, praying, and counting our lucky stars that this will come to an end this year. So right now there's no big surprises and we're not expecting any, but this project has been a challenge from the day one. So that's where that is. Any questions on any of these?
Do you have
Right.
any concerns in that? Do you feel like we're in a good place financially?
I think, well, we're still working on our rate study, and the rate study came back pretty much what we expected, and the rates are increasing, especially with the Plant 1 rebuild and some other projects. We're in a place where we're increasing rates. The ideal position would be that we would have, like Robin would say, lots of reserves saved up for some of these projects and for some of these builds, but we are going to have to raise rates and issue bonds. So, we have busy couple years ahead of us as we're addressing some of these issues.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any further discussion on the financial report before we move on? Okay, well, let's move on to 7B.
So this is our annual review and renewal of our benefits. And Ann did a lot of work on this. She did a lot of work on this. And ultimately what we came out with was a recommendation that increases our costs, I think, about 2%. So this is our request to you guys to go ahead and authorize this renewal of the insurance policy, and we'll get on with it. It is reasonable. It's exactly the same benefits. There's a couple of minor tweaks, but it's the same benefits and only a 2% increase, which was a surprise. Given our inflationary environment, I was expecting, like we saw in the 80s and 90s, 10, 12, 15% every year, kind of forever. And this was, like I say, a happy surprise.
Any discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve the renewal of medical benefits for non-union employees and commissioners.
I'll second that. The motion is second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Interesting, I've noticed some other medical, in other organizations, medical also has not increased. very substantial this year. I'm kind of curious why.
Yeah, I have no insight at all.
Me either. I think it was perms where that came. Not any significant.
It's kind of counter to what.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Maybe Annette's got any ideas on it. I don't know.
I do
So-
not, sorry about
You
that.
don't. We're all surprised by that then. Yeah. Okay.
Surprised, but not displeased.
Pleasantly surprised, yeah.
Yeah, so the next item we have is a resolution to change, essentially update the job description for an employee. And when we do that, we'll bring it back to the commission. This is our accounting technician, front desk, Tracy, out here.
Mhm.
And this updates the position, modernizes it, gets the updated salary range so that we can recruit if need be.
Yeah, and it's gotten bigger. The range is higher and lower.
Yes,
Yeah, I see no issue with it.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 832.
I'll second that. Motion is second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now let's move on to the operations report.
Commissioners, I have just a couple.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, yeah, I just have a couple of brief items and then I was gonna pass it over, the baton over to Kurt, who will just discuss an internal fiber project we just completed last week. So it shouldn't take too long. On the first part, wanted to mention that Chris and I met with our Bonneville Power account exec since the last commission meeting. And he introduced a person that's going to be replacing him, but the discussion centered around the draft policy that Bonneville has just issued regarding the amount of power and the allocation of that power to customers at the tier 1 price. And basically what I can report here is as far as impact on us, not much. We may see a little drop in our tier 1 allocation. That's yet to be determined. But the action now moves to basically tier 2 products that Bonneville might offer going forward. And that's something we'll be active in because we'll be playing in that playground. And we won't need to see if there are products that Bonneville is going to offer that will be attractive to us, such as a 100% carbon-free power supply product. So I'd say stay tuned on that front. The second thing I wanted to talk about is just a clarification of comments I made at the last commission meeting regarding Nooksack River flows, because I may have left the impression that those lower flows were going to impact basically our operations, which is not the case at all. What we have been seeing are lower flows ahead of schedule for the year. They've been running less than 25% of the mean flows down the river that we've seen based on the 50-year record for river flows. So they are low, but to put that in perspective, I looked this morning at the flow at the Ferndale gauge, and the amount of flow was 1,430 CFS. You convert that to gallons per day, and there is roughly 924 million gallons of water moving down that river, even at that low flow amount. So it's still significant. And bear in mind, we're pulling about, of that 924 million gallons of water, we're pulling about 11 million. So substantially less. The one impact that we may see going forward right now is kind of get into the hydraulics of the river. At real low flows, the topography of the bottom of the river may change, and we may see some sedimentation moving towards our intake facility, particularly at Ferndale. The other thing I noted with that recent brief rain event we had, there was an immediate spike in turbidity of the river. So, you think about at lower flows, you start getting materials from runoff going into that river, that turbidity really takes off and It had been running about 20 NTUs, or FTUs is the term that USGS uses. But with that recent rain, they spiked from 20 to 1,500. So that really gets the water crew scrambling to make sure we've got sufficient chemical dosage to get that turbidity down. But it's just a spike. It's already settling back down. And with that, I think I'll stop, see if you have any questions or what I have, and then I'll pass it on to Kurt. Hearing none. Kurt, do you want to talk about the
Hello
fire?
again, commissioners. This is just an update on the E22. Annette just mentioned it. It's the Ferndale substation project. We're getting kind of close to the end. There's always that last 10%, which is going to be extra difficult, especially on a project like this. But what we did last week was we have an existing fiber communications backbone that runs between our plants, and also crucially, it is a link with BPA to have knowledge of what's going on inside the substation. So we had to take an existing run and pull it down off of and this isn't internal PUD work, this was contractors did it, but they had to pull it off of the poles that were there, and there was 244 tubes that had to be spliced together, as well as an additional 48, and that had to all be ran into the new substation. Worked it out in about a day. There was a little bit of prep work before, the day before and the day after, but it was one day, and that's what they're hoping to do it in one day, and they did, and we're back up online with BPA, and that was a very large milestone for this project. I just want to give you a heads up on that. Let you know, see if you have any questions.
Oh, when is it time? What is your current estimate for when the project will be wrapped up?
It's a challenging thing to say, just because we've had so many difficulties with this project. I mean, one of the main things we're waiting for now is a third-party testing firm to come in to work on getting all the breakers and all the stuff tested, but kind of hoping for middle to end of September.
Great.
Great, thanks,
Good
commissioners.
luck.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kurt.
Okay, so let's move on in the agenda. From the operations report to commissioner reports. Sure, I'll go first. I'm planning to attend the PUD meetings in September. I'm planning to travel to both water committee and the regular committee meetings, and I'm planning to attend August. You know, I actually PPC was last week, and I missed it. Because I was in mourning, but I will plan to attend September PPC. So that's my full
Are
report.
you going to attend that in person or virtually?
PPC?
Yeah.
I think in person.
It's an hour-and-a-half meeting or 2-hour meeting in Portland.
Right. I'm thinking that it's something I can combine with some other stuff. So I'm not sure if I said this before, but there's 2 meetings that happen with PPC. One's an afternoon meeting, and then there's a morning meeting the next day. And so when I've gone to both, and it's been very beneficial to be there in person. But if it's only an hour-and-a-half meeting for one day, then I won't go down there for that. I'll definitely do it by Zoom. But if it's the 2 days, I will go down. So.
I'd say for my report, we had our July Energy Northwest Board of Directors joint meeting with the executive board. And a lot was covered. I think, you know, the big thing on everybody's mind is whether Energy Northwest is gonna move forward with the development of these SMRs. And there's been some disagreement within the executive board about how much additional money they should put into the project. And they did allocate some more, a few $1 million more to try to get that project off the ground. They're obviously looking for other PUDs and co-ops to join what they're calling phase 0. But you know, tremendous amount of financial risk there, being essentially the second project. There's a project in Texas right now. And then this would be sort of the next one. You know, BPA, someone from BPA is at every single one of those meetings that we've had so far. And the overall impression that I'm getting from BPA is they really want nothing to do with new generation. And Energy Northwest has asked them to help support them financially with this, getting this SMR project off the ground, and they got a hard no so far. And so, you know, they give their presentations about how they're working on transmission, but I'm really not seeing BPA coming to the table as a leader, kind of helping the region get through this very challenging time that we're in with energy supply right now. And so, you know, I do think Energy Northwest could play that role, especially within the public power community. But I think that they are severely underestimating the political resistance that they're going to get to SMRs. They really need to combine, an SMR is a small modular reactor. I'll put my dollar in the acronym jar. You know, I really think that it needs to be combined with some sort of another strategy related to developing renewables and integrating those renewables. And I get that SMRs are not always the best technology for integrating renewables, but I think they're expecting for this project to work a lot of money from the state clean energy fund. And I don't think they're going to get it unless it's part of a broader strategy involving renewable energy. So I know a lot of state representatives are going out to tour the Columbia generating station. I think Senator Shoemake is out there, either just did a tour or is about to do one. So they're really trying to educate people. But I just wanted to share kind of the sort of pulse on what's happening there from, you know, like an 8-hour meeting. But I'd say that sort of like distills where we're at with it, is that it's cool that Energy Northwest is pushing ahead and really trying to be a leader on this, taking on some risk, certainly moving into a place where they don't necessarily need to lead. But, you know, to be determined how successful that is going to be. And as far as I'm not sure what September meetings I'm going to yet. I think I'd like to get to the WPUDA meetings in person. And then I'm doing, there's like a port event on the 16th that I'm going to say some words about rural broadband and the importance of rural broadband. So I'm going to that on the 16th. And then I'm also going to the County Climate Impacts Advisory meeting on the 17th to hear some updates. And Ellen Murphy, I think, is just kind of hoping to hear a little bit more regularly from the PUD on some issues. And there's some sort of like zoning stuff that Councilmember Galloway is going to be talking about related to energy. So I think that's an important thing to look at with some of the projects that we're talking about, so that we don't have at least local regulations getting in our way. So those are the two things I know I'm doing, is the port event for rural broadband on the 16th, and then the 17th is the Climate Impacts Advisory Council, and more on the September WPUDA meetings once I sort my schedule out.
You got me to remember something. one thing I forgot to mention is that we both got an email
Marcus.
from Marcus Vitara about solar.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with Eddie Yuri. And we think that the county code could use, we finally got the wind ordinance
Mhm.
update that I started working on in 2016.
Mhm.
It tells you how long some things take to get done.
Did it change the whole height?
It's the main thing that the ordinance did is to standardize our requirements to what most of the counties in the state have, which is basically reasonable setbacks, sound requirements that are conforming to other nuisance sound requirements, and heights, removing height limitations. Because the more height you get, the more swept area you get, and actually the safer wind turbine installation is. And then adding language about the need to incorporate site evaluation work and including environmental surveys. And this is all the lessons that I learned when I went and met with the wind developers all over the state, particularly the one, I think when I shared with the commission before, the best example being the coastal community wind project in Grays Harbor. Because to this date, they don't have a documented vertical in that facility. So that's what I call success, doesn't mean that there's still an impact, but with an eye on, and obviously recognizing we have Chris, you and I disagree. We have a modest wind resource in Whatcom County, I believe. Not a non-existent wind resource in Whatcom County, which is.
And we disagree.
Yeah, we disagree.
There's not an economic wind resource in Whatcom.
Yeah, and we disagree. Similarly, that there's a need for code adaptation to support this, so particularly what I would call community solar. So I'd like to see that. There's a big hole in the city's climate action plan. Meaning the wastewater treatment plant was supposed to be their big win, and that's now on hold on for potentially 10 years. I mean, what to do next? They bought themselves, I should say it's on hold. They bought themselves about a decade on what to do as far as being able to continue to utilize their existing infrastructure for solids management. So it seems like community solar could be a piece that could take a dent, that could make a dent in the city's climate action plan too. I've asked people, by the way, to contact you, Commissioner Grant, about that. If people are looking for what do you do at the city level, some candidates are looking for, what are meaningful action that can be taken at the city level because you were involved in that, the task force. Hopefully you can dust off your memory and remember what is the next big hitter. Because folks are looking for what that big hitter is. And then lastly, something I forgot to mention is that I have been discussing with various community leaders about the need to do a study on a countywide biodigestion facility. And the reason that I want to investigate that is because I believe that it could provide a pressure relief for all of our wastewater treatment plants in Whatcom County. Because if we separate the solids and handle them in an energy plant type facility, we can allow the real estate that's at our wastewater treatment plants to be focused on tertiary treatment. And the reason that that's so important is that, a decade or two ago, I don't think we understood how much nutrients from wastewater treatment plants and toxins from wastewater treatment plants are negatively impacting the nearshore environment. But we know a lot more now. And there's a ratcheting up of environmental requirements on wastewater treatment plants that I envision we'll get to the point that we'll wonder, why are we even discharging this water? It's so clean. Maybe we should be turning it back into drinking water. And they're doing that in LA, of course. And so the thing that we're gonna we need to do is, real estate is of course valuable. The cost of building new wastewater treatment plants, for example, for the city of Bellingham would be $2 billion. So, if we, as a community can give more life to the existing wastewater treatment plants and also allow them to have the space to do tertiary treatment on site, then that might be beneficial. Now, having said that, there's potential of this being relevant to the PUD. I don't want to imply anything that I'm in any way speaking in those discussions on behalf of the PUD. I'm explicitly saying I'm not. But it's certainly I'd welcome in conversation at the PUD about that subject of a municipal digester. So it certainly isn't impossible to imagine the PUD being part of it.
Okay. Yeah,
And I'd like to come back to the commission once I have a little bit more, where I've done a little bit more investigation on this. With the topic of how do we fund a study to investigate the countywide municipal digester? And perhaps PUD might contribute a small amount towards that.
yeah, I'd be open to hearing more.
Because it'd be wonderful to get all the local governments to contribute something to it. Just so that, it's a product that's beneficial, a project that's worth exploring and could have benefits to everybody. So. That's it. I forgot to mention this.
No problem.
Okay, well, that's, commission reports, we have a second public comment period. Does anybody have public comment?
Go for it.
I think we have none.
Okay. So let's move on. The last thing on our agenda is executive session. We're not anticipating any decisions. We are planning to go into executive session. I think, how much time are we budgeting for this? 60 minutes?
Well, hard stop at 10:30.
The hard stop.
I really did, but I'm gonna push it as much as I can. I'll go through my potential litigation updates as quickly as I can. It's probably take 10 to 15 minutes tops.
Okay, so then you'll excuse yourself and we'll continue with the rest of the meeting. Is that
Yeah,
what-
unless you wanted me in for part of it, I couldn't tell from our conversations.
I think it's fine. I think if you just want to do your potential litigation, then we can move on to.
We could take the other portion of the conversation and move it, since Jamie is not here, to our next meeting, but we can discuss all that in executive session. So usually when we say we're going in executive session, we have a pretty. And then, of course, usually,
Why don't we just
the
say
time
60
changes.
minutes?
so we'll say 60
And then
minutes.
if we end early, we can let Ann know, right?
That's okay, right, Ann?
I think it's better to do longer than shorter based on past.
Okay,
Brian, if you're listening, I'd like you to sit on the first two matters. If
Oh.
possible, come in the room. Yeah. I'm not gonna open up the Zoom.
yeah, okay, great.
Perfect, yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe take a short break in between.
Yeah, a couple minute break. Respect to John's
Yep.
time, so
Bye.
5 minutes, okay. you know, like for me, it's helpful because I didn't plan my conversation with them. I don't have much to fire. Waiting for-
I do know that. I found your son.
You guys going to string band this year?
You don't have plans to.
I'm live. Okay, yeah, so we just got out of executive session. It ran a little bit long. We wrapped up. There was no action taken. And if there's nothing else for the good of the order today, so I'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you all. Bye-bye.